By 10 o'clock on a gray March morning, 3 pickup trucks had already slowed on County Road 18. None of them stopped. They only rolled past Bennett Farm with windows down, engines idling low, drivers turning their heads toward the same strange sight beyond the fence. A refrigerated truck stood crooked beside the south field. Blue plastic tubs were stacked in the mud. Water moved inside them. So did something else. Mara Bennett carried one tub at a time down the slick bank, braced it against her hip, and tipped its contents into a shallow channel cut through the black earth. The water erupted for half a second. Tiny bodies flicked beneath the surface and disappeared into grass, roots, and brown water. Then the field became still again. Mara climbed back up for another tub. She was 24, though from the county road she looked younger. Her chest waders hung loose around her shoulders. Mud had dried across one cheek. A strand of brown hair had worked free from the knot at the back of her neck and kept blowing across her eyes. She ignored it. Another truck slowed. The driver leaned toward the passenger window. Mara never looked up. Behind her stretched 19 acres of ground the Bennett family had been fighting for nearly 70 years. In wet springs, it became water. In dry summers, it became cracked clay. Tractors sank there. Corn drowned there. Soybeans came up thin and yellow. Every generation of Bennetts had dug another ditch, pulled another tile line, rented another pump, or made another promise that next year they would finally get the water off. Now Daniel Bennett was dead. The farm owed the bank $186,000, and his daughter appeared to be doing the one thing nobody could understand. She was putting something alive back into the water. By lunch, the story had reached the feed store. By supper, it had reached the diner. By the next morning, people were saying Daniel Bennett's girl had taken the last good money on the farm and dumped it into the swamp. Mara kept working. She carried another tub down the bank, then another. She did not explain what was inside them. She had learned quickly that people asked fewer questions when they had already decided on the answer. 3 months earlier, Bennett Farm had looked less like an inheritance than a collection of unfinished emergencies. The west fence leaned into the ditch. Rain came through the machinery shed in 4 places. The old John Deere tractor leaked hydraulic fluid wherever it stopped. The combine needed a repair Daniel had postponed through 2 harvests. The barn doors no longer met in the middle. Nearly 80 acres of cropped ground were tired, and the 19 acres along the south boundary had been written down by the bank's appraiser as though they were a defect attached to the deed. Mara inherited all of it 4 days before Christmas. Her father had been carrying feed sacks into the mudroom when he stopped, pressed one hand against the doorframe, and sat down hard on the floor. His heart had been failing quietly for years. By the time Mara reached him from the kitchen, there was almost nothing left to do. After the funeral, the farm kept moving. Bills still arrived. Cattle still needed water. A tractor battery died. The bank called. Grief had no line on the balance sheet. Daniel had borrowed heavily after 2 bad seasons. 1 year had drowned the corn before it could establish. The next had burned the soybeans under a hard summer sky. He had borrowed again to keep machinery running and seed in the ground. Then he died before any of it could be repaired. At the bank, Mara sat across from a polished desk while a loan officer turned pages with clean hands. He was not cruel. That almost made it worse. He pointed to the debt schedule, then to the appraised value, then to the south parcel. 19 acres, poor drainage, unreliable production, expensive to improve. The suggestion was simple: sell what could be sold, lease what could not be managed, reduce exposure, protect what remained. Mara drove home without speaking to anyone. At the south field, she stopped the truck and sat behind the wheel. Water from an earlier rain still shone between last year's broken corn stalks. A white egret stood where the planter had bogged down the spring before. The field had cost them seed. It had cost them fuel. It had cost them repairs. Her father had fought it for 30 years. His father had fought it before him. And the bank was right about one thing. As cropland, it was almost worthless. For the first few weeks after the funeral, Mara considered selling. Then she started cleaning the farm office. The room sat behind the kitchen, narrow and badly lit, with gray filing cabinets along one wall and old seed caps hanging from nails near the door. Daniel had saved everything: tax receipts, machinery manuals, rainfall records, aerial photographs, notes on calves, notes on fertilizer, notes written on the backs of envelopes. Mara spent 3 evenings sorting paper into piles. On the 4th, she found a black field notebook beneath a stack of insurance forms. The cover was bent. Several pages had swollen from moisture. It contained no grand plan. No hidden instructions. Just Daniel's handwriting. March 17th. Water across South Lane by 6:10 a.m. April 2. Lower ditch full. East corner still holding after 4 days. May 11th. Tractor sank at Old Cottonwood Line. June 6. Upper field dried first. South pocket still green. October 19th. After hard rain, water always cuts same path below rise. Mara turned page after page. Storms from 12 years earlier. Flood depths. Dates. Sketches. Arrows. Small X marks beside places where equipment had buried itself. At first, it looked like a record of failure. Then Mara noticed the repetition. The same arrows appeared again and again. The same pockets held water. The same narrow ridge stayed above it. The same bend carried overflow toward the county ditch. She pulled an old aerial photograph from the filing cabinet and laid it beside the notebook. Then another. Then a soil map. She spent the night on the kitchen floor with paper spread around her knees. At 2 in the morning, she stopped trying to read the notes one by one. She stood, walked around the table, looked down, and saw it. Her father had spent decades drawing the same shape without knowing it. Not a failed field. A basin. Water entered in 3 places. It slowed behind a natural rise. It gathered in 2 deeper pockets. It escaped through 1 low throat toward the ditch. The field was already doing something. They had simply spent 70 years trying to stop it. Mara looked toward the dark window over the sink. For years, every decision had begun with the same question: how do we get the water out? She picked up her father's notebook again. Then she asked a different one. What if the water stayed? That was the turn. Not crawfish, not profit, not a business plan, just a different question. Over the next 2 weeks, Mara drove south twice. She stood beside commercial ponds and watched how shallow water moved through them. She watched workers pull traps. She watched where vegetation was allowed to remain and where it was controlled. She asked about the mistakes that cost money. She came home with muddy boots, a legal pad full of notes, and fewer illusions than she had started with. She understood quickly that Bennett Farm could not copy a large Louisiana operation. Wrong scale, wrong money, wrong infrastructure. She could not afford deep construction. She could not afford to pump water endlessly. She could not afford to learn through a season of expensive mistakes. So she went back to the field. She stopped seeing 19 acres. She saw the ridge, the 2 deep pockets, the narrow outlet, the path water already preferred. She rented a compact excavator for as few days as possible. Instead of carving the entire field into a commercial pond, she followed what was already there. A shallow channel through the lowest run. A deeper refuge where water naturally lingered. A low berm to slow overflow. A second basin behind the Old Cottonwood Line. A control point near the ditch. From County Road 18, it looked like destruction. Fresh earth lay in rough bands. Old crop rows vanished under mud. Standing water spread where neighbors believed Mara should have been trying to remove it. At the diner, people shook their heads. At the feed store, They watched her buy pipe fittings, rubber boots, wire traps, and water test strips. A farmer who had known Daniel for 30 years said the girl was making the wettest field in the county wetter. Another said the bank would own Bennett Farm before harvest. A neighboring landowner began quietly asking what the south parcel might bring at foreclosure. Mara heard most of it. She answered almost none of it. Then the refrigerated truck arrived. The blue tubs came off, and the thing moving inside them finally had a name: Crawfish. 12,000 juveniles. Not enough to make Mara rich. More than enough to make the county laugh. She released them into the channels her father had spent his life wishing were dry. Then she waited for the land to prove whether she had understood it. The first month was ugly. Some crawfish died. A warm spell lowered the water faster than Mara expected. Predators found the shallowest sections. One berm softened after a thunderstorm and split before sunrise. Mara found the break under a flashlight beam. Brown water was cutting through the gap, not rushing yet, but building. She tried to bring the tractor closer. The front tires sank to the axle. She backed out before losing the machine. So she worked by hand. Clay, sandbags, scrapboards, whatever she could move. By dawn, her shoulders shook when she lifted the shovel. The breech held. That afternoon, the tractor blew a hydraulic line. 2 days later, the pump quit. The farm began consuming money from every direction. Diesel money became pump money. Fence money became pipe money. A machinery bill sat unopened on the refrigerator for 3 days because Mara already knew the number inside. She worked the rest of the farm because the crawfish could not carry everything. She planted the acres that could still make a crop. She repaired fence. She took bookkeeping work 2 evenings a week for a seed dealer in town. Before daylight, she checked the south bottom. After dark, she checked it again. She learned the field one mistake at a time. One corner stayed too shallow. Another held more oxygen because wind crossed it better. Crawfish in the channel near submerged grass grew faster. The section she had thought would perform best did not. So she stopped trusting the plan simply because it was hers. She changed it, moved water differently, protected the weak bank, shifted traps, recorded everything. By May, the bank sent another notice. Mara opened it at the kitchen table. Rain ticked against the porch roof. Her father's boots still sat beside the mudroom door. She had not moved them. The papers lay in front of her. Interest, insurance, diesel, equipment, seed, repairs, the past due amount. For the first time, she added the numbers and found no comforting way to arrange them. If the crawfish failed, there was no second experiment. No fresh loan. No hidden reserve. No uncle coming with a check. There was only land and debt. Mara sat there until the coffee went cold. The thought came quietly. Maybe the bank was right. Maybe everybody was right. Maybe she had mistaken desperation for insight. The rain continued. Somewhere beyond the kitchen window, water was moving toward the south field. Before sunrise, Mara put on her boots. She went back out. The first trap held 11 marketable crawfish. The second held 9. The third held 14. Mara crouched beside the sorting tub. They were not enough. Not yet, but they were larger than the week before. She checked another trap, then another. The pattern held. That morning, for the first time, the notebook contained more good numbers than bad ones. The first sale fit into the back of her pickup. A family restaurant 40 miles away agreed to take a small load. Mara delivered it herself. 3 days later, the owner called again. Then a seafood market wanted a weekend order. Then a regional distributor asked whether Mara could provide consistent volume. The word consistent mattered more than the word interested. Interest did not save farms. Repeat orders did. Mara increased harvest carefully. She did not empty the system for fast cash. She kept records, adjusted timing, watched water. By early summer, Bennett Farm had two separate reputations. The first was familiar. A struggling family farm with aging machinery and too much debt. The second was stranger. People had begun hearing that the swamp was producing money. Not much, they said. Probably not enough. Maybe temporary. Maybe luck. Mara let them talk. She had begun to see something they had not. The crawfish were only part of the value. The real engine was the water. For years, rain had fallen on the higher fields, gathered speed, and moved south. It cut through bare soil, carried sediment, flooded the lowest ground anyway, then left through the ditch. The Bennetts had paid to remove it. Mara's channels slowed it. The basins spread it. Vegetation caught sediment. The low ground absorbed pressure that once hit the rest of the farm. She had not built a perfect system. She had built one that matched the shape her father had spent decades recording. Then, in late June, the sky changed. The first warning came through the radio while Mara was repairing a gate. A tropical system had pushed moisture inland. The forecast shifted twice in 12 hours. The next morning, the air felt heavy enough to touch. By evening, thunder sat beyond the southern tree line. Rain began after dark. At first, it was ordinary summer rain. Then, it strengthened. By midnight, the gutters could not carry it. Water sheeted off the barn roof. The yard became black mud. Mara drove her pickup to the south field, with the windshield wipers beating at full speed. Her headlights found water where the access lane should have been. The first basin was already full. She got out. Rain struck her hood hard enough to blur the beam of her flashlight. Water from the upper fields was arriving faster than she had ever seen. It entered the first channel in a brown current, crossed the low basin, pressed against the main berm. Mara walked it once, then again. Halfway down, her boot sank. Not mud. Movement. The bank was slumping. She dropped to one knee and pressed both hands into it. Water seeped through the face. A dark line widened. Mara ran. The tractor started on the second try. She drove toward the berm. 20 yards from it, the front wheels lost traction. She backed up, tried another angle. The rear wheels spun. Mud sprayed against the fender. The machine was useless. The weak section was not. Water had begun cutting through. Mara grabbed a shovel. The first load of clay washed away before she could turn back for the second. She dragged sandbags from the utility trailer. One split, then another. The rain intensified. Lightning flashed across the field. For a second, the whole south bottom appeared white. Water, channels, bent grass. The black line of the berm. Then darkness. Mara shoved a board into the breach and packed clay behind it. The board moved. She drove a steel post through it. The post leaned. Another flash. The water on the upstream side had climbed higher. Too high. If the berm opened, the current would not simply drain a pond. It would cut. It would carry soil. Traps. Stock. Months of work. Maybe the entire harvest. Mara pulled out her phone. No signal. She threw it back into the truck. Another section began overtopping 20 yards away. She ran there, blocked it, ran back. The first breach had widened. For the next hour, Mara stopped thinking in terms of a farm. There was only the next 10 feet. The next bag. The next shovelful. The next place water wanted to win. Her gloves tore. Mud filled one boot. A branch came down somewhere beyond the field with a crack like a gunshot. The rain did not ease. Then a pair of headlights appeared. One truck, moving slowly down the access lane. Mara turned. The truck stopped on firmer ground. The driver stepped out in a yellow rain jacket. It was Earl Mercer, the retired farmer whose pickup had been the first to slow down 3 months earlier. He looked at the berm, then at Mara, then at the water. "You built it to hold water," he said. Mara was breathing too hard to answer. Earl picked up a shovel. Then let's make it hold. That was all. No apology, no speech, no admission that he had laughed. They worked. Two people could move faster than one. Earl held boards while Mara drove posts. Mara packed clay while Earl dragged bags. When the main breach began to push again, they reinforced the lower face instead of fighting the water head-on. Minutes mattered. Inches mattered. The field filled. The berm held. Then the second basin spilled into the overflow channel exactly where Mara had designed it to. The current turned. Slowed. Spread. For the first time all night, the water stopped looking like something attacking the farm. It looked like something moving through it. By dawn, the worst rain had passed. Mara stood beside the truck with both hands shaking. Earl looked across the flooded south bottom. Behind them, the upper fields were wet but intact. No deep washouts. No fresh gullies. No brown river cutting straight through the crop. The 19 acres everyone had called useless had taken the force of the storm. Earl wiped rain from his face. He said nothing else. He did not need to. The storm was not the victory. Not yet. For 2 days, the water stayed too high to know what remained underneath it. 2 traps were gone. A pipe had shifted. 1 small berm had overtopped. Mara walked the edges and found no way to judge the stock. The bank was due to review the loan again. The distributor expected product. And somewhere beneath acres of brown water was the only thing on Bennett Farm capable of producing immediate cash. When the water finally began to fall, Mara reset a line of traps before dark. She slept 4 hours, then returned with a headlamp. Mist lay low over the field. The first trap was underwater. Mara reached down, closed her hand around the wire, pulled. It barely moved. For 1 second, she thought it had snagged. Then the trap broke the surface. It was full. Crawfish shifted against one another in the wire cage. Mara stood still. Water dripped from the trap. She emptied it into the sorting tub, reached for the second. Heavy. The third. Heavy. The fourth. Heavier. By sunrise, the little farm UTV was sagging under tubs of crawfish, more than Mara had hauled in on any morning before the storm. The system had not merely survived. It had done what the old field had always tried to do: take water, slow it, hold it. And now, for the first time in 70 years, that behavior had value. Within a week, Mara was harvesting at the strongest rate of the season. The distributor increased its orders. The first restaurant sent 2 more buyers. A seafood market began advertising locally raised live crawfish on weekends. Pickup trucks now turned through the Bennett gate instead of slowing down outside it. Customers brought coolers. Buyers brought insulated boxes. Mara built a wash and sort station beside the barn from used equipment and salvaged lumber. The first season did not make her rich. It did something better. It gave Bennett Farm time. Mara brought the overdue bank payment current. She paid the machinery bill that had been sitting under a refrigerator magnet. She replaced the worst hydraulic lines on the tractor. She repaired the west fence. Then she kept the rest. When the bank reviewed the farm again, the loan officer turned to the same 19 acres that had once been treated like dead weight. This time, there were invoices, repeat customers, production records, a working water plan, revenue. The banker looked at the papers longer than Mara expected. Finally, he glanced toward the window. "I suppose we were valuing the wrong thing." Mara looked at him. "No," she said, "you were valuing it for the wrong job." The banker said nothing. Neither did Mara. The numbers were enough. The following year, she improved the system without trying to turn success into spectacle. She reinforced the weak berm, reshaped 2 channels, improved harvest lanes, reduced wasted trips, tracked water more carefully. Her costs fell. Her survival rates improved. The south bottom became more dependable than it had ever been under corn or soybeans. The rest of the farm changed with it. Stormwater moved more slowly. Erosion decreased in the upper fields. Mara added cover crops to the fields that needed them and eased back on tillage where the soil responded. She had no interest in chasing every new idea, and even less in being called innovative. She kept the habit her father had taught her. Watch. Write it down. Look again. By the third season, people who had once laughed began arriving with questions. One farmer wanted to know how Mara had mapped the water. Another had 9 acres that flooded every spring. The county agent spent an afternoon walking the levees. A landowner who had once hoped to buy Bennett Farm cheaply asked whether she would look at a wet pasture on his property. Mara helped where she could. She never reminded anyone what they had said. She did not need to. The proof was visible from the road, the repaired machinery shed, the gravel near the wash station, the delivery trucks, the standing crops above the basin. The old Bennett Farm sign still fixed to its posts at the end of the lane. 3 years after Daniel died, Mara paid off the most dangerous portion of the operating debt. Not all of it. There was no miracle in that. Farms did not become easy because one idea worked. There were still broken machines, a season of disease pressure, a market dip, a drought that forced Mara to rethink water all over again. One winter, the old tractor finally failed beyond the point of sensible repair. But Bennett Farm was no longer collapsing. It was learning. One cold afternoon, Mara returned to the office behind the kitchen. She opened the filing cabinet, took out her father's old map. The paper had softened along the folds. Daniel's pencil marks were still there. Arrows, dates, storm depths, the low places he had worried over. Mara framed the map and hung it above her desk. Beside it, she kept the original black notebook. Dry, safe. Its bent cover still held the marks of the years her father had carried it through fields and storms. Mara did not see the crawfish operation as proof that her father had been wrong. He had spent 30 years trying to protect the farm with the tools and assumptions he had inherited. What he gave her was more valuable than a finished answer. He taught her to notice. Years later, younger farmers in the county would tell the story in a simpler way. They would say Mara Bennett inherited a failing farm, that the bank called the south ground worthless, that she flooded it on purpose, that somehow the swamp began making money. But the real story was quieter. It was in a notebook filled with rain dates, in a question asked at 2 in the morning, in a bank of mud held together during a storm. In the morning after Mara nearly quit, when she put on her boots anyway, the money came later. Recognition came later still. Every spring, mist settled over the south bottom before sunrise. Red-winged blackbirds balanced on fence posts. Water moved quietly through the channels. Beyond them, the old barn leaned slightly east, just as it always had. The farmhouse still needed new windows. Mud still followed Mara into the kitchen. Nothing about Bennett Farm looked like sudden wealth. That was not what she had saved. She had saved the right to remain, the right to keep learning the same ground her father had walked, the right to leave the farm to someone else one day without handing them only debt. At dawn, Mara often stood on the berm with a small waterproof field notebook in one hand. Her father's original notebook stayed dry in the office, beneath the framed map. Below her, the surface looked almost motionless. But under it, the whole place was alive. And in the lowest part of the property, where generations of Bennetts had dug ditches to make the water leave, the water stayed, not as an enemy, not as a mistake, as part of the farm. That was the lesson the land had been trying to teach them all along. Sometimes a legacy survives not because you force the old ground to become something new. Sometimes it survives because, at last, someone learns to see what it has been trying to become.